Kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you so much for joining us for this decadal celebration of the work of care. It's so lovely to be in community with fellow academics, with policymakers, counselors, and activists and community members. This is precisely the sort of bridge and space that we imagined in care when thinking about the work we do. What we have this evening are a series of friends and interlocutors who have been with care through various parts of the journey. And I will invite them to offer their reflections on the journey of care. It's better to hear from those that have been with us in the journey. And then we will open the evening with a screening of the documentary that reflects the work of care. So I invite you to this dialogue and conversation. Enjoy. Do please feel free to go and get food throughout the evening. So we will begin by inviting Professor Ted Zorn to offer his reflections. Ted is former Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Massey Business School and was instrumental in bringing care into Aotearoa and into Massey specifically. He is Professor of Communication in the School of Communication, Journalism and Marketing, and really a stalwart in the area of organizational communication. Welcome, Ted.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Ted Zorn toko ingoa, ko Charleston, South Carolina, USA aho, ko Kupa River te awa, ko Pinnacle Mountain te maunga, ke Tamaki Makoro, aho e noho ana. He waka eke noa. No reira, re iro rangatira ma, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you very much, Mohan, for inviting me to say a few words at the opening evening of the 10-year anniversary Conference for Care. In 2012, when I was hired to be Dean or Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Massey Business School by former Vice Chancellor, the Honorable Steve Mahari, my marching orders from him were to work to ensure that our research made a positive difference to New Zealand. And I took that directive very seriously. Some of you at Massey will remember that the university's motto back then, mottos change all the time, but our motto back then was the engine of the new New Zealand, which suggested that we as a university wanted to play a key role in creating a new and better New Zealand. Many people would expect the business school that I was appointed to lead to focus on research that would improve the economy, to make businesses more successful in New Zealand and increase the wealth of the nation. And we certainly did much of that. We had then and we have now a number of outstanding scholars in finance, economics, management, and marketing, for example, whose research pointed the way for New Zealand businesses to succeed financially. Many of my business colleagues talked about and still talk about our goal as being to help New Zealand Inc., meaning helping the country as a whole, along with its many component parts, to succeed in the global marketplace. But to me, our work as a university and as a business school is never simply about helping businesses become globally successful or helping the country generate more wealth, as much as I want to see those things as well. But the market share that's captured by Xero, or the price per unit that Fonterra or Zespri can command, or the share market price of Fisher and Paykel Healthcare are useful but quite limited indicators of how successful we are as a country. So for me, being the engine of the new New Zealand was also about addressing issues that were potentially inhibiting many New Zealanders from experiencing the benefits of our economy and enhancing our well-being as a country. Issues like entrenched inequality, systemic racism, inhumane treatment of new migrants meant that many people haven't had the opportunities at times for fulfilling lives, even as the country experiences many successes. To tackle those kinds of difficult issues, we needed great researchers. Researchers who were focused not just on doing world-class research and publishing in top academic journals, those things are of course important, but also ensuring their research makes a difference in the lives of individuals and communities. There were a number of things I did as dean to try to advance that sort of a vision. One was to create what we called the research translation competition, in which researchers competed in translating their research findings into forms that were accessible to the public and that were likely to find their way into the mainstream press and into mainstream discussion. I knew as a university and as a business school, we were doing great research, but too often that research went only into academic journals and never had the opportunity to be read by, much less make a difference in, the wider community. So we ran the research translation competition successfully at Massey for a few years, and it became quite popular and is now run jointly by all of the New Zealand business schools. Another thing I did was to negotiate with the then Vice Chancellor for 5 Dean's chairs, which would give us the opportunity to hire some outstanding scholars to achieve our goals. I had known about Mohan's work for many years. After all, Mohan and I, as communication scholars, attend the same conferences each year with many of the people that I see on the screen right now. And so I knew of Mohan and was very impressed by his work. And I also knew that his work was focused on addressing health inequities and giving voice to those who are often marginalized in wealthy countries like the US, Singapore, and New Zealand. And thankfully, about the time we were creating the new Dean's Chairs, Mohan came onto our radar as someone who might just be interested in coming to New Zealand. And I could see that the Care Center would do just the sort of work that would help us address big, thorny issues in New Zealand, as well as contributing to continuing to address those issues in other parts of the Asia Pacific. So I'm proud to have played a small role in bringing Mohan and the Care Center to New Zealand. I know throughout this conference you'll be exploring not only what has been achieved to date, and that is very significant, but also the important work that remains. So I wish you the best for the conference, and I thank you all for the important work that you're doing. Ngā mihi mai oha kia koutou katoa.
Ngā mihi nui. Ted, thank you for seeing that vision of connecting research and translating it into community in making impact, and really playing that role in terms of thinking through what role can a university play. So once again, thank you so much. We also have with us Professor Jonathan Elms, who is Director of Research at Massey Business School, and the Sir Stephen Tyndall Chair Professor in Retail Management. Welcome, Jonathan.
Kia ora, Mohan. Nau mai, hare mai. Welcome, everyone. As Mohan said, my name is Jonathan Elms, and I'm the Director of Research for the Massey Business School. It is my pleasure to offer a few select words in terms of an introduction to CARE's milestone 10-year anniversary conference. Wow. On behalf of the Massey Business School and the wider university, I wish to acknowledge the significant efforts, outcomes, as well as the successes of CARE. In particular, I wish to acknowledge the impact of CARE on Aotearoa's communities, organisations, whānau, hapu and iwi, as part of our collective efforts along our journey as a university to become Tatiriti-led. I also wish to commend CARE for organising a superb programme of speakers as part of the conference. It looks like you're going to have a thoroughly fantastic week of discussions and debate around building transformative futures. Now, my sincere apologies for not being with you in person this evening, but I do look forward to participating with you all later on this week. Congratulations to all. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi nui, Jonathan, and again, thank you for your work in thinking through what does it mean to look at questions of metrics, how do you measure the impact of work, and really starting these conversations within the Massey Business School about thinking through the ways in which our work connects to community. Speaking of community, it's my privilege to next welcome Professor Walid Afifi, who is Professor of Communication at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and President of the National Communication Association, as well as Fellow of the International Communication Association. In the most recent conference of the NCA that was organized by Walid, place and community were major themes of conversation. Walid is a visionary leader who thinks of community and the ways in which our scholarship can connect to community. Welcome, Walid.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Mohan, for this introduction and for putting together and everyone involved a beautiful beautiful conference. I wish I was there in person. I'll do my best to attend as much of it as I can from a distance in the United States, and specifically University of California in Santa Barbara. On that front, I want to acknowledge that the university campus is located on indigenous land, and it's important that we understand the significance of observing protocols and recognizing the traditional custodians of the land. It demonstrates the respect the university has for Chumash people, history, and culture of the community, and all Native Americans as America's first peoples. We acknowledge the Chumash people who are traditional custodians of this land, and we pay respect to elders both past and present, as well as other indigenous people present. I'm going to take just a few minutes to make informal remarks celebrating CARE and speaking to the ways in which understanding community, being part of community, involving community is something that, in my opinion, if the communication department, in fact, all academics are really to survive and thrive, we must do better in involving community in all aspects of our work, our pedagogy, our service, and our research. In that way, I'm also Associate Dean for Community Engagement at the university. So some of the things I'm just going to celebrate is some of the programs that CARE has and some of the incredible work that is being done there. In its history so far, CARE has had 13 activists in residence, and these people are a literal who's who of people who sacrifice and live day to day to make change in communities, people who have been imprisoned for their commitments, who have made change in communities across the globe, who really represent the type of people that make a difference in community and care deeply about community and advocating for community. CARE also has 17 ongoing global projects. In fact, one of the things that really stands out about CARE, I think I would say CARE, the people behind CARE, their commitment to community, their commitment to involvement represents the model, as does Mohan as a director, of what I would love to see in communication as examples of community work. Their projects, as you undoubtedly know, span the globe. Here, just a sampling from West Bengal to Singapore to India. In fact, Mohan at the most recent National Communication Association, which we just had last week, we were fortunate enough to have him join us for some really important conversations, one on structural violence, recognizing the great Dr. Paul Farmer, and the other in which he spoke in Bengali are on structural violence and its impacts. And this commitment to native tongues and discussing these issues through voices of the native people in their tongues is one of those commitments that I so value about CARE and the work of CARE. And the last thing I did in terms of just sort of reflecting a little bit is there's 22 white papers that CARE and affiliated community members and scholars have completed since 2018 that were on the website. And so I did a word cloud of the executive summaries of all 22 white papers. And I think it's really revealing of the commitments that CARE has. And so as you can see, the most common word in these white papers is community, is voice. On the left, you'll see there's an emphasis on workers, emphasis on the top right on health, on structures, racism, organizing, culture-centered. Advisory board are some of the most commonly referenced terms. So as you look at this word cloud, you in fact see so many of the commitments that that CARE includes in its mission statements, but actually activates through its products that it produces, which are reflected in the actual actions on the ground and the community commitments to community advisory boards and work on the ground that speak to people on the margins, as you see in this word cloud, to migrants, to global aspects, and of course to speaking of the ways in which colonial powers shape so much of the ways that we live. As myself as a Palestinian, and having Mohan support me in various causes for the Palestinian people, I especially appreciate these commitments that CARE makes. On that front, my father, who recently passed about a year ago, actually was a friend and colleague with Dr. Edward Said, who is one of the icons in Palestinian icons. I was fortunate enough to be around him in our living rooms and in several conversations. And indeed, so many of his works and quotes from those works reflect the commitments of not only Mohan as director, but of CARE. And so I'll post sort of two quotes just for this purpose that I think speak to some of those commitments. One from Dr. Edward Said is, every single empire in its official discourse has said that it is not like all the others, that its circumstances are special, that it has a mission to enlighten, civilize, bring order and democracy, and that it uses forces only as a last resort. It uses force only as a last resort. And sadder still, there always is a chorus of willing intellectuals to say calming words about benign or altruistic empires, as if one shouldn't trust the evidence of one's eyes, watching the destruction and the misery and death brought by the latest mission civilisatrice, which is sort of the civilizing mission. Indeed, Dr. Dutta and the scholars that are affiliated with CARE are quite the opposite of the intellectuals to which Edward Said notes here. Another quote that I thought is worth noting in the context of celebrating CARE is this last of the quotes that I'll be referencing, also from Edward Said. We're also looking at our observers. We Palestinians sometimes forget that, as in country after country, the surveillance, confinement, and study of Palestinians is part of the process of reducing our status and preventing our national fulfillment, except as the other who is opposite and unequal, always on the defensive. We too are looking. We too are scrutinizing, assessing, judging. We are more than someone's object. We do more than stand passively in front of whatever, for whatever reason, has wanted to look at us. Indeed, it is precisely this sort of commitment and understanding and this pushing against this othering of peoples that CARE has so consistently committed to and enacted. So for those and many other reasons, I want to thank and appreciate CARE and Dr. Mohan Dutta as director for creating precisely the kind of center that we all need more of in the academic community partnerships. Thanks so much.
Namihinui Walid, thank you for performing your labor of care to do this presentation and actually meticulously going through our work to give us a sense of what we do at the center. I also so appreciate your solidarity, both in terms of being there with your body amidst the struggles of care, and also seeing the ways in which our struggles are interconnected. You offer us a framework for connecting the struggles of Tangata Whenua, of indigenous peoples, with two of the most violent forms of colonization in contemporary times, the occupation of Palestine by the state of Israel and the occupation of Kashmir. And so appreciate this dialogic space that you have created and the ways in which then you push through that space to create interventions within our discipline. So thank you, Walid. We have with us Professor Teresa Thompson, who has served as the long-standing editor-in-chief of the journal Health Communication. Terry is particularly special because she has, over the years, created the space for the kind of scholarship that we seek to enact and embody. Often we talk about publishing in academic journals as one way in which scholarship is recognized, but also a pivotal way for academics to really survive in the academe. And the interventions we have created, Terry, have actually generated those spaces for us to be able to do this work. Welcome.
I'm honored and blessed to be here with you tonight in the US and to particularly share with you the value of the work in which Dr. Dutta and CARE have engaged for these many years. I have been familiar with Mohan's work since he was a graduate student, and have seen the importance and evolution of this work and the impact of it across the globe. I think that I will be arrogant enough to speak on behalf of health communication scholars more generally, to talk about the importance of this work, the extension of the somewhat simplistic perspectives with which we began our research, and the significance of the view that Mohan and CARE have brought to the study of communication and health communication in particular. Thank you for allowing me to join you tonight.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you once again for doing the labor of building an inclusive, open-ended discipline that brings in and invites in difference as the way for doing scholarship. I will now turn to Professor Noshir Contractor, President of the International Communication Association. Nosh is also a fellow of the ICA. He's the Jane S. and William J. White Professor of Behavioral Sciences in the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Science, the School of Communication, and Kellogg School of Management, and Director of the Science and Networks and Communities Sonic Research Group at Northwestern University. As president of the ICA, Nosh has played an instrumental role in internationalizing the discipline and in really building registers for recognition of the Global South in the discipline. Welcome, Nosh.
Thank you very much, Mohan. Thanks again for giving me the opportunity to join you for this momentous event. Like others who have spoken before me, in particular Ted, Walid, and Terry, I have had the pleasure of knowing Mohan from the time that, over 2 decades. That's given me an opportunity to see over the years the incredible development and the incredible contributions that he has made, and certainly in the last, certainly in his role in the Center for Culture-Centered Approaches to Research and Evaluation. So first of all, congratulations on celebrating the 10th anniversary. I wish I was there with you at the auditorium in the Sir Geoffrey Peren building. I promise that I will want to be there in person before long. And in fact, I had the opportunity to have conversations about exactly that with Mohan at the National Communication Association meeting that was ably organized by Walid and his team in New Orleans just last week. So as I said, I have a special appreciation for the ways in which Mohan has navigated across different spheres. Like Mohan, I was born in India and raised in India. Like Mohan, I have an undergraduate degree in engineering. We went to competing universities, him to the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur and me to the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. But I think very soon after I first got to meet Mohan, and certainly when he was on the faculty at Purdue University, I could see that Mohan had a vision that was one that really spoke to the broader audience in terms of recognizing that the field of communication was, even though it had made a lot of progress, was still largely Western-centric. And Mohan was amongst the first scholars that I met who really took upon the challenge of not just talking the talk, but walking the walk in his scholarship and in the ways in which he has engaged with not only individuals, but issues that are so central to a global understanding of communication, especially from the Global South, that was sorely missing, and I might add, is still largely missing in our field. But I think that the Center, by CARE in particular, is in my mind a poster child of what we need to see much more around the world, not only in different geographies, but more importantly, I think in terms of the different constituents that CARE has included as part of its signature. The fact that it has recognized that there is scholarship, there is engagement with practitioners, there's engagement with activists, there is an opportunity and in fact an obligation to bring those parts of our stakeholders to the table, not simply to sit in an ivory tower. And I'm absolutely in awe of what Mohan and obviously his very, very capable team, all of you have been able to accomplish out there. You've given new meaning to the word interventions. As a traditional social scientist in the United States, interventions has a very narrow definition of what it means to have an intervention. But I think Mohan, in terms of understanding the ways in which participatory culture-centered processes and strategies are organized, especially in marginalized contexts, these are the ways in which you are working hard to bring about changes in the so-called neocolonial structures of global oppression and exploitation that continue to be so rampant and so prevalent around the world. I will just touch on 3 points very quickly. One is I think that CARE and the leadership as well as what you have there has really underscored the importance of community. I don't have the word clouds that Waleed has, but it really echoed to hear what Waleed had to say about that. The importance of community as being larger than just bringing people from different scholarly endeavors, which certainly CARE has done. But as I said, to bring the activists, to bring the interventionists, to bring the practitioners all into the table. I think CARE has really been one of the best showcases of looking at the scholarship from the global south. And the last is that one of the things that Mohan does well is he builds connections across different spaces. And by spaces, I don't mean just geographic spaces, but substantive spaces. Terry spoke about CARE being focused on health. From where I sit, I think it goes beyond health. It goes into so many other areas, even within the field of communication and beyond the field of communication. And this was all one of the reasons why as soon as I was part of the executive committee and the leadership at the International Communication Association, knowing that one of the things I wanted to do during my tenure in this role was to take the next step in internationalizing ICA. I invited Mohan to be amongst the first podcasts that I was putting together. So I created a podcast network for the International Communication Association. Let me see if I can share my screen and show you what that looks like. So this is the ICA podcast network. And one of the first ones that we had there was Interventions from the Global South, which is a podcast that is in fact hosted by Mohan. And as you can see, it's a podcast exploring how we develop the habits of listening to the voices of community organizers, activists, and intellectuals from and off the global south, imagining different worlds. We already have several episodes on there that you might want to take a look at. One of the things I discovered through that process is how much he builds connections to other areas and how CARE is engaging, not just with the field of communication, but with a lot of other different areas. So I will definitely encourage you to take a look and to take a listen, I should say, to the Interventions from the Global South podcast. And I just wish you all the very best and look forward to the next 10 years of CARE. Thank you very much again.
It's an exciting series that brings together intellectuals, activists, and community organizers in conversation. So do have a listen to that. Thanks much. I was talking about community and activism and politics. I want to turn to our counselor from the Palestine North City Council, Lorna Johnson, to say a few words. Lorna has been an important interlocutor and source of solidarity for CARE in much of our work. And what has been so powerful is her openness to listening, as we have heard community voices and raised those, and the way in which He has created that infrastructure for listening to that and engaging with it.
Thank you, Mohan. I must say it's a little daunting to come on after all those very high-powered academics, but I'll do my best. Es Mr. Luna. Kami mengenai sehari bergerak sebagai saksana sekolah clear Mawaha. So I'm just introducing myself in Irish because my mother is Irish and I strongly identify with the colonial harm that was done to Ireland over very many years, not the least of which was the removal of the ability to speak one's own language. And also, just to give you a small example, after the induced famine in 1847, the population of Ireland dropped so significantly that it has not yet recovered. So those are just two small things that I just want to put before you, because I think it probably helps to explain why on the surface, English-speaking white person with a lot of privilege, identify very strongly with a lot of the work that CARE does. And in my role on the City Council, I'm chair of the Community Committee. And it's very important for us on that committee to hear from different people in our community that don't often have a voice to speak to council, to talk about what they should, what they feel that we should be doing. And I think when you're an elected representative, it's very important to have those challenges. And one of the things that I really admire about CARE and about Mohan's work is that he's not afraid to challenge structure, authority, the way things are done. And that's a very valuable voice that we need to hear, those of us who do have at least some power to change things. And I'm very much in awe of the fearlessness with which Mohan goes about his work. And I know that in many aspects of his work, he faces a lot of criticism and a lot of hate, actually. But that to me just says that he is doing the good work, that he is speaking up about inequity, about fascism, about colonial practice, about the ways in which voices are marginalised and all over the world, but also here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, also here in Palmerston North. So I guess I just want to really offer a word of encouragement and congratulations from my own perspective, but also from the City Council perspective, because we do need to be challenged. We do need to make sure that we're always thinking of community wellbeing, and that we're looking to hear from those voices that are not very loud, that perhaps don't have a way in to speak to us. So I do take my hat off to CARE and the work that's been done over the years, and I wish you very many more successful years. So, kia ora koutou.
Namihi nui Lorna. I want to acknowledge that there are real convergences between the Irish famine and the Great Bengal famine that had killed over 1 million Bengalis as an organized genocide by the British Empire, not because of shortage of food, but because of how food organizing was redistributed, making sure that food didn't reach Bengal in the midst of the famine. So that in the work of the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, the famine was created by the empire. And I think that creates a powerful entry point to see how hunger and ongoing challenges of hunger are produced by structures and the organizing of the structures. I also want to acknowledge that any time that the community has had an event, be it our photo voice exhibits or our Matariki events, and we have reached out to Lorna and she's been there to offer the support to the community and to engage in those conversations. So this work in terms of community raising voices is only strengthened by those in politics that listen and that create the spaces for the voices in dialogue. So thank you for that. Before we move into the next section, which is the screening of the documentary, I just want to acknowledge a few people that are here in the room. I want to acknowledge our Associate Head of School, Doug Ashwell, who sort of has been instrumental in doing the nuts and bolts of how things are going to go, where things are going to go, how things are going to be organized, and that kind of way. So thank you, Doug. I also want to acknowledge the many researchers of CARE who have collectively held up this Kaupapa. This couldn't be possible without you. I see some of you on the screen. Pauline, it's lovely to see you join us from Hong Kong. There are many CARE researchers from the Singapore days who themselves have borne with their bodies on the line the forces of the authoritarian state. They have spoken truth to power, and in that process have been precarized. From my place of privilege as a senior academic, I survived it. There are others who had to pay a lot greater prices because of where they were located within that structure. And I want to acknowledge all those. I also want to acknowledge current researchers at CARE and former researchers at CARE here in Aotearoa. Christine, thank you so much for being such an integral part of the work of CARE in fielding. Vanessa, appreciate you so much if you would raise your hand for our work in Highbury. Richa, thank you for putting your body on the line with the work on Hindutva and receiving and negotiating much of that hate. We also have many of our community advisory groups and researchers who came in as interns and stay-ins. So Francine, thank you for being part of the work of CARE, and we really appreciated having you with us. We have a number of our community advisory group members that are present within us and among us today. And thank you to each one of you. And then we have those who have moved into different contexts, like Pooja. It's a pleasure to see you back here in this space. And I also want to acknowledge Mabubur for the work that you do with refugees in the context of refugee organizing. Richard, behind the camera, thank you for your ongoing work with making sure that everything keeps running. So this couldn't just happen without the effort that you put into making it appear so seamless, and we know it's not seamless because, when you see those WhatsApp texts at 8:45 or 9 in the evening, you know that you're stressing about how things are going to go the next day. So thank you for all that labor of care. And Breeze, what could I say? Really, in many ways, Breeze holds up the hands that hold up the infrastructure of care. So thank you for all the labor that you do. And, Breeze was in India caring for his parents and being there for about 3 months, was it? And we could really feel Breeze's absence. And then he said, okay, you know what? I will step in and I will work long distance and satellite, and I will work from India. It's like, okay, we can actually get by. And all of this is to say that, often the kind of ways in which we recognize institutional structures, we need to recognize the people that do the care work, that do the labor of care. And we need to make sure that we have infrastructures built in to support them and to uphold them and to uphold the work that they do. So thank you. And finally, I just want to say thank you to my partner, Debelina, who has actually borne many of the struggles. I remember at a point of time in Singapore where she thought that our phone lines were being tapped. And, this was in the midst of the migrant organizing work we were doing. And, part of those conversations makes me realize that when you choose to marry someone, you don't walk into it knowing what that person will turn into or what their life will bring along the way. So thank you for so graciously putting up with that. And I also want to acknowledge my children, Shlok, Soham, and Trisha, who have sort of negotiated that. And finally, I want to thank my parents who are here with us today, Ma and Baba. Thank you, who have supported my journey, who have taught me, but also who have given me the strength, in terms of deciding what is the right thing to do and being on that path. I remember, when doing the migrant organizing work, there are occasions where, people would say, do you really need to do this work? Can you not pick another research topic? And I think it's the faith that you instilled in me that, when voices speak, they need to be heard with truth and with authenticity. And that's what matters. I think it's a really important lesson, and I'm grateful to you for that. So with that, I will invite us to watch this documentary that is really Richard's labor of care, and look forward to a conversation after we have watched the documentary. Thank you all once again for coming.
So what we do at CARE is work through the ways in which communication can address the injustices that we see globally. The theoretical framework we draw upon is the culture-centered approach, which makes a fairly simple argument, which is that when you build voice infrastructures, meaning resources, spaces, architectures for voices of those at the margins, those become the basis for transforming structures. When you build these voice infrastructures, that those who have systematically been marginalized can participate in these voice infrastructures to mobilize, to articulate their voices, and through that process change the overarching norms, rules, and frameworks that guide how resources are distributed in society.
I would say there are three things that comes to my mind when I think about CARE and its features. The first one, just the evidence and impact of collaborating with community members. And I think that's very central to the work that CARE does. And I would say Professor Dutta, right, he lives by what he preaches. In doing that, right, he's also had struggles and sort of target on his back. But I think his work is an inspiration for many people who are interested in working at the margins of academia and margins of society and kind of bridging that gap. And I think, so the one thing that I would say is definitely this collaboration with community members. Academia is often criticized for living in the ivory tower. But CARE has created this bridge between being in the ivory space and doing social work, right? Social change work on the ground. And so, one of the things I would say as a feature of that is also that it's an embodied process to walk that bridge, right? Professor Dutta is an academic, but he's also an activist. And so he's proven numerous times through his work that to walk that connection, that we have to be part of that process and implicated in that process. And that means, right, we have to also put our bodies on the line, and that it becomes embodied in that way. Care really is very much focused on, right, solidarity and building long-term relationship. And I think that's also a hallmark of doing care work, is that it's not a performance of solidarity, right, or performance of relation building so that you have research or work and then you leave that space, but that it really is inherent in the work that care does and is very much, again, exemplified by what I just said earlier about how embodied this process is, so that as you are working through this, you are also very much, right, building solidarity and relationship.
In a culture-centered project in the Pialgeria village in the Paschim Midnapur district of West Bengal, the CARE research team led by Professor Dutta collaborated with community members in identifying local problems and developing locally meaningful solutions. Through participatory workshops, community-wide surveys designed by community members, and village-level meetings, community members decided to build local spaces for nurturing leisurely activities such as dances, games, and everyday interactions. In the life world of the community, these dances and games and the everyday interactions within the community were integral to their realization of health. Our culture-centered project, guided, designed, and owned by community members, zeroed in on building a local community center. The community planned the budget, the design, and the labor. Community members led the implementation of the project, contributing their labor, managing the accounts and resources, and coordinating the various activities. The Community Center project depicts the framework of the CCA in placing communities at the heart of concept development, ideation, and implementation. When communities are placed at the center of design, they are the enablers in figuring out how to understand the problems in their everyday lives and the kinds of solutions they need to develop.
In Singapore, when I first got there in 2013, he was trying to search out what I would call kind of hidden poverty, because Singapore presents itself as such an outwardly affluent place that if you're just visiting there like I was, it would be hard to know that there were impoverished population. But he was trying to bring to the surface what was largely hidden.
Let's take the struggles of hyper precarious migrant workers in Singapore, and in the work that CARE has done over the last decade with migrant workers, the thing that is often critical is how the everyday meanings of health are defined in terms of the processes of exploitation that make migrant workers disposable, and at the same time the processes of representation that are not available to migrant workers.
We have no energy left in our body. Due to this, we often fall ill and visit to the hospital.
Many workers work at construction sites every day in Singapore. Having decent food is essential to a healthy body. Food that is unclean or unhygienic can adversely affect health of workers. Having sufficient quality and quantity of food is a basic health need of every worker.
Respect the food rights of workers.
So CARE is a little bit different to other research centres in the sense that we use an approach called the culture-centred approach, and rather than sort of going into a community and doing a one-off survey or a series of interviews and making an observation and then just leaving it there, we do field work and we actively work with community members to identify problems that are meaningful for them and co-develop respective solutions. So within my own field work in a place called Glen Innes, we co-developed a media campaign where residents could share their stories. And so I've seen that social impact firsthand. Following the research, we did a series of evaluative interviews and found that even the act of open-ended questions of what does health mean to you and what are some of the struggles that you're going through, that in itself had a degree of transformative element, just being listened to. But within the advisory meetings as well, you see people taking ownership, you see people's attitudes changing, you see people becoming more and more involved. And of course, with the campaign, we were able to bring residents' voices to the forefront in ways that gained national attention.
Where we live affects our health.
Glen Innes' example is an excellent one for communities negotiating poverty in Aotearoa. The everyday experiences of health are tied to the conditions of poor housing, or the lack of housing, or what one might consider housing insecurity. That is directly connected to issues such as mold in the housing, the lack of proper insulation, the lack of access to heat during the winter months, which then again are intertwined with experiences of asthma, experiences of flu, with symptoms like bronchitis, for instance, but also with overall sense of insecurity, which is key to health, including impacting mental health.
Where you live determines the quality of your healthcare.
I had to wait 3 hours before I got up and asked him again. I had to come again to the library and sit there and read a book. After 3 hours, I came outside, went back, and so that about 5 hours before I was asleep. That happens every day.
Waiting hours to receive medical care means that the sick get sicker.
Poverty is not our future.
Let's take the example of housing, is building the infrastructures for voice. The argument being that when you build these voice infrastructures and those at the margins can participate in articulating their voices and in expressing the meanings that are salient to them, that becomes the basis for generating empirically based, locally situated, conceptually rich knowledge claims, which then challenge those broader structures, but also through that process challenge the systems of erasure that have kept those kinds of knowledge frames out of the discursive space. So when CARE builds these or co-creates these voice infrastructures with communities at the margins, such as we saw in the No Singaporeans Left Behind campaign in Singapore, or the campaign in Glen Innes, Poverty is Not Our Future, created by advisory group members made up of communities that are struggling with poverty, right? So these advisory groups in that sense are quite transformative. They are not built of experts or professionals or service providers, but these advisory groups comprise people, households that are negotiating poverty. if you consider the expanse of the work of CARE and, the work over the decade, it has spanned over 10 countries across 4 continents. And that work is sustained by local research leadership. And what that essentially means is that these researchers at the local level in various communities actually shape the theorizing process, take ownership of the theorizing process, and take ownership of the kinds of interventions that are created out of that research process.
Well, as a community researcher in Highbury, I thoroughly enjoyed it because I know my community really well, and it was quite easy for me to tap into spaces around this community. Being a community researcher has, I guess, enabled me to reach, people in the community who might not usually be reached, especially around what's going on for the hood and what we can do as a community to change it. We see the good and the bad. I see the good and the bad in the community, and I'm known, so it made people want to be more a part of the research going on around Highbury to see what we can do. So there's also that huge trust factor. So I am a community member, so that really did bring a lot more whānau and friends to come along and see what we were up to and how they can put their voice in and be heard to create this change. A lot of the kōrero that we had was quite raw and emotional, and that just makes it more special though, because those are exactly the things that we want to target and change around us here in Highbury.
Maybe 10 of us, 12 of us, all been getting together for the last probably 5 weeks, organising this beautiful and wonderful Matariki event celebration for 2021, all sort of being tautoko each other and just supporting each other, getting it all organised and gathering up all the resources and the tools and
This Matariki event is to come together as one and celebrate our Māori New Year, and all different cultures, nationalities, we all come together as one and celebrate our Matariki.
But everybody, like everyone, that's all the members of the advisory Highbury group have just been amazing. Everyone's just helped each other and get everything here and set up and ready for tonight's event.
We actually come together as a whānau and discuss, what things we can do for our community and how we can progress with a lot of our mahi. So I've been with the group 3 years now. So, in those 3 years I've seen how we've progressed.
I think with communities like ours, often the press looks for the negative story, but there are lots of positive stories happening all the time. Community can get together to do positive stuff. We need to hear more about it. I think just be really proud of where we all live. I mean, I live here too, and we need to be proud of our community and speak positively about it to people. Yeah.
The local leadership in knowledge generation is vital, and community researchers therefore play important roles as lead authors or collaborating authors. In fact, many of our white papers, policy briefs are led by or co-authored by community researchers, community organizers and activists.
What I personally for myself have felt and feel amongst our LGBTQI people is the togetherness, the whakawhanaungatanga, tautokotanga, awhitanga, that feel-good factor of bringing us all together and discussing that very important issue of sexual and family violence amongst our LGBTQI family. So yeah, it's been really enlightening for me, and having to draw everybody in and talk about the experiences and, you know, sad, good experiences and everything. And yeah, it's been really good, because I found out now that I'm talking to trans brothers. I never ever, you know, I just say hi and walk by. Now, I say, oh, hello, brother. Oh, hello. Oh, you kings are so fabulous. And do you know what I mean? It's just that tautokotanga me whanaungatanga, that family support system, that, a supporting of going out there to reach out to all the different groups and everything. So it's about the caring, sharing, supporting systems of how care have put into our LGBTQI group down in Wellington.
As you're trying to experiment with these various forms of knowledge generation and changing practices of claiming ownership of knowledge, you're also struggling against a structure that is quite set in terms of its traditional ways. So you see what I mean, that while you're engaging in these practices, you're simultaneously trying to participate in conversations that hopefully transform how our discipline sees the work of knowledge generation, and how the acknowledged structures of knowledge generation see the process of knowledge generation. And I think that is where we have more work to do as CARE. I want to talk a little bit about the work with Deccan Development Society. And the Deccan Development Society is organized as sanghams, or collectives of largely landless, Dalit or oppressed caste women farmers. And the work of the women farmers in building transformation in agriculture by turning to indigenous knowledge systems, by turning to practices such as seed saving and seed sharing, which challenge the neoliberal, neo-colonial onslaught on agriculture that we see across the global south, is built upon creating voice infrastructures. And for the women, and this is something that women have done in DDS, voice infrastructures take the forms of community radio and community-based video storytelling. So they have already been doing that. They run a radio station where they narrate the story of the seed, but that is juxtaposed in the backdrop of them narrating everyday local events, creating news that is locally based, creating programming that is locally based, that draws upon local cultural values, local cultural traditions to articulate the story of the seed. The same thing they do with video-based storytelling in terms of creating documentaries, building knowledge registers that actually challenge the neoliberal formation, which suggests that biotechnology-based agricultural interventions are the solutions to food insecurity in the backdrop of climate change. And they create an intervention that actually challenged this very large-scale global knowledge system that is fueled by the forces of global capital. So you can think about the powerful forces behind that dominant knowledge system, and the women intervene into that through their storytelling based upon video-based narratives. A key lesson in this project is how voices of communities matter. We have often said in culture-centered work that when you listen to people, they tell you what the problems are and how to solve them. One thing we learned from the women farmers in this project, as you can see throughout their voices, is that when they participate and when they take ownership, they pretty much have a good understanding of how to go about solving problems. In this case, the problem of climate change and how to adapt food systems to climate change. At the end of the day then, the key lesson to take away from this project is that listening to community voices at the grassroots, can offer us solutions about how we look at problems of global warming and climate change and look at ways of solving these problems. So the Activist in Residence program is created with the idea that activists who are negotiating structures, challenging structures, have much to offer in terms of the knowledge about struggles for justice by drawing upon their lived experiences in these struggles. So it goes back to this idea of democratizing knowledge through the culture-centered approach that we talked about earlier. And the Activist in Residence program is an intervention in that sense fundamentally, that it recognizes activists as generators of knowledge, as participants in the process of knowledge generation. So an activist in residence spends about 5 to 6 days here with us at CARE. During that time, they deliver a public talk, they participate in a workshop, and then they work with me on the white paper, and they also participate in a dialogue in the form of an interview. And it's quite powerful, Richard, in terms of seeing how that program works toward democratizing knowledge, but also building sustainable relationships toward that process of changing these hegemonic structures, including structures of knowledge generation.
It was quite an extraordinary experience when CARE first came to Aotearoa, New Zealand, about over 4 years ago now, I think, because there'd never been anything like this before. For decades, I've been working at the interface between academia and the activist world. And it's always been very concerning to me, the lack of understanding among university people about the realities of activist life and work for change, and what the activist community can offer to the academic world and vice versa. So when this institute came to Palmerston North and I first met Professor Dutta and his staff and research people, I was so impressed at their genuine commitment to working with people, activists and researchers who are community-based in a genuinely respectful way, rather than in the top-down elitist way that so often happens between academics and those of us who, at least in my case, mostly work outside the system, though I've been inside it as well. So the genuine commitment to bridging the academic activist divide, to actually achieving change at community grassroots level in a real way, using research for change, not just locking it up in journal articles and books and in the lecture theatre, and to having real dialogue between those of us who are outside and those who are inside the system. These were all really innovative, and I've just seen it changing and developing over the years that CARE has been here, and I'm really grateful that CARE came to this country, this isolated outpost at the bottom of the Pacific, and have shared their work and knowledge and experience and development with us.
I was quite surprised actually to receive a link from the university that wanted to hear what I had to say around the area of colonisation, but I think it was at a pivotal time not long after what we consider to be the 250-year colonisation and the replica Endeavour arrival. So it was a follow-on from that, and coming here to discuss and talk about some of the issues that we faced at that time and the way in which Māori had interacted with the replica coming back to Aotearoa. So it was really good experience to have met with you. I've met with the team. I found it was an awesome programs that you had been running here, and the ability to want to engage with our ethnic groups, our refugee groups, and where is the space for Māori in terms of what we can offer and what can be built in terms of our relationships.
those activist in residence conversations also become spaces for bringing in our community researchers, our community advisory group members in conversations, and they become dialogic spaces, if you will, for knowledge exchange.
I think it's very important. I think it should be in every university because it allows that face-to-face contact with students that may not actually get that opportunity to learn from what's happening at the grassroots level with activists like ourselves, and that misconception of what we actually represent and who we represent. And before the program, the only way it's delivered is through media as to what that looks like, and that media is normally controlled. What they see on TV is not necessarily what they get. And this experience allowed activists to come in, advocates to come in and actually share our experiences with other members of the university, students and community groups.
You know, knowledge is generated in community. I think that is one of the key lessons that we learn here at CARE. So the question for us is, how do we intentionally build community, contribute to community, and be in community for the work that we do? How do we recognize and acknowledge those that share their knowledge to form our community? In terms of how we think of care is in the idea of care as community, and it's really important for us to build that invitational spaces with other academics as much as with activists and communities, and we are so privileged.
Well, you know, one of the things I really like is that it's a center that does things, that gets involved, that's engaged. And I think one of the things it does is to helps to build strong and enduring collaborations and relationships with key members of different communities. And I think that's really important for universities to kind of build those relationships. And it's really important for the quality of the research that we do. It addresses important community issues. It's a strong learning environment for all people involved. The researchers, the administrators, the community members, everybody learns from the experience. And I like the fact that it supports the needs of different people who may feel disenfranchised, who may be marginalized, and helps them to improve their health outcomes.
The principles of the co-papa of care around empowering communities to address their own problems and inequalities are so important in this day and age of kind of with the withdrawal of the welfare state, the underfunding of communities, and underfunding of welfare and care and health and these kind of things. So it's so important for communities to sort of be empowered to act for themselves, to solve problems for themselves. And at the end of the day, I mean, what else is communication research for if it's not about being about having a social impact and about like helping people and actually like addressing the really bad problems of inequality caused by inequality in our modern society.
The story of the center isn't just a series of projects that come one after another, and it's not just a series of concepts that come one after another. A story that I often tell my students when trying to explain the culture-centered approach comes out of that experience of being with CARE while they were in Singapore, and that's that there was a foreign domestic worker, I believe she was Malaysian, working in Singapore, and had been involved in these conversations about how to create the Respect Our Rights campaign that would inform employers of their obligations to foreign domestic workers. And creating that campaign is one thing, but that particular domestic worker came up to Professor Dutta after the conversation where they were looking over the campaign materials and told a story to him about how her employer had seized her passport and was not allowing her to return to visit her family, and that she had accused her of stealing so that the police wouldn't help the foreign domestic worker. And to see how Professor Dutta and the other members of the CARE team stopped the research process and then engaged in a how do we help this particular woman advocate for her needs? What are the resources that are available that CARE has connections to that we can leverage? How can we talk to lawyers at the legal clinic at the National University of Singapore? How can we use our connections with the police and our connections with the Ministry of Labor or the Ministry of Manpower there, to make sure that this woman, this particular woman, is able to recover her passport, is able to go back home, and to see that putting people first is an authentic thing that happens when the care center works with communities, rather than saying, how do we go to a community to get a publication? How do we go to a community to get a grant? It is an authentic experience of helping people when they express a need, when they express an interest, and leveraging our resources as members of the academic community, our resources as people who are more advantaged, to serve those people. And I think that kind of example is what shows how powerful care can be.
Despite the Singapore law specifying very clearly the rights and terms of a foreign domestic worker employed in the country, there are many employers who are guilty of not respecting these agreements, often subjecting the foreign domestic worker to a violation of one or all of these terms of agreement in her contract. Based on Home's report in 2012, 96% of FDWs interviewed by Home had their documents confiscated, including copies of their contract. 78 of these 151 women were deceived about the content of the work contract. The contract protects the rights of both the worker and the employer, outlining specifically the FDW's right to food, shelter, days off, rest times, wages, place of residence, and conditions of work.
So my collaborator Tharati Taiaroa introduced me to the work of Professor Mohan Dutta. Together we studied one of Mohan Datta's texts titled Voices of Resistance. And one of the most compelling ideas to my mind was this concept, communicative inequalities. I understood it as a concept that theorized inequalities in opportunities for voice, infrastructural and otherwise, for voices to be heard. So the emphasis of the book I read as having this core idea of creating spaces for listening to voice, and especially voices of resistance that aim to create openings for a politics of social change.
So knowledge at the margins is embedded within struggles. That is something we learn from communities at the margins, that you cannot separate the process of knowledge generation from the struggles against the forms of marginalization.
Tharati and I began to ask, how can a hearing be made possible within the form of an exhibition? How might our practices create openings to listen to voices from the margins of the margins? Can curatorial practice be delinked from exhibition outcome and instead be motivated by ethics of listening, imagination, and relational commitments? In 2019, Tharati and I invited Professor Mohan Dutta to give a workshop on these topics at St. Paul Street Gallery's Curatorial Symposium. Afterwards, that same year, Tharati and I undertook an internship at CARE and trained in the CCA. I've had the good fortune since to work at CARE as a community researcher and a junior fellow.
So a fundamental ethos of CARE is to place our bodies in the midst of struggle, in solidarity with struggle, because after all, if you're going to co-create voice infrastructures, that calls for us as researchers, as community researchers, to be present in those struggles against racism, against colonization, against capitalism, against Islamophobia, against casteism, depending upon the context, and actually then work to mobilize alongside communities in those struggles to transform structures. And then coming here to Aotearoa, what I have found most beautiful is the solidarity of Maori colleagues.
Care have a big involvement with our people, our iwi and our advisory group. I don't know how we could have done it without care. It's care's not only interest, but it's their tautoko, their manaakitanga ki tātou marae, ki a mātou iwi, ngā hapori hoki. And I think with care coming into the picture, it's made us realise they actually make us feel special and they make us feel like we've been listened to.
That kind of solidarity is just so tremendous, and the force of it, anchored in aroha, anchored in manakitanga, anchored in mutual trust, is so powerful in sustaining the work that we do here at CARE.
I mean, our land occupation, our land is us and we are the land. We belong to the whenua, and the same as the whenua is us. To have people come in, like the Kawanatanga or the Kauniera or Horizon, whoever, to come and take a piece of our land, that to us is like sacred, it's tapu. And so in taking a piece of land and then giving it back means that that is a taonga. Our whenua is our taonga. And it's definitely not for sale, and it should never have been used for the purpose of outside the iwi.
All this land around here was Ngāti Kaupata's ancestral land, and we lived on it and fed off it for 2 centuries.
All our lands, they just come in like they've done many, many times before and just taken the land.
The confiscation of our whenua has had a significant amount of long-standing grievances amongst our people. The process has been subject to criticisms from a number of different angles, from those who believe that the redress is insufficient to compensate for Māori losses, to those who see no value in revisiting the painful and continuous historical issues. Today we stand and say, kaupata tangata, what we say matters.
I mean, we've been struggling for the last 180 years since the Treaty of Waitangi, and of course when you're told that there's a partnership in that treaty, we are still yet to see the full impact of that partnership.
As we grapple with the colonizing forces of climate change, and climate change is inherently colonial because it is a product of the processes of large-scale colonialism and capitalism, and then the frontiers of capitalism, which is sort of neoliberal capitalism that has accelerated the process of climate change. So if you think about climate change as fundamentally colonial, then the question is, how do we address climate justice? And for the work of CARE, to address climate justice is to build infrastructures for the global south and the south in the north, to participate in forms of knowledge generation, and to work through these forms of knowledge generation to create solutions locally, to address processes of erasure regionally and nationally, and globally to challenge the forces of colonialism and capitalism. So in the work of CARE going forward, as a node for doing work on communication that foregrounds the voices of the global south, the question is, how do we build these infrastructures for voice that will generate knowledge, that will participate in struggles to secure a just climate future, and that will continue to offer leadership, if you will, to conversations that connect communities, that connect activists, that connect academics in these processes of social change.
There are lots of friends there, and I'm mindful of their time as well. As we wrap up, would love to hear maybe for the next 5 minutes from you who have been in community with us, what you would like to see, hear, do, where would you like to see us go, maybe in the next 5 years of our journey, whatever.
Thank you, Professor Dutta. That was really amazing. Rather than commenting on this thing, I would like to ask you a question. Like, you have shown us many projects all over the world. Do you think any of your project has been completed or ever been completed?
Wow, that's such a beautiful question. So, I think the idea of completion itself seems so complex in the sense that you might think, say, a community has built Marakai. I'm talking about the fielding work on Selena, Christine. You have built your Marakai, and that work has continued to feed so many whānau and continue to generate conversations in the market where you bring the food and sell it. Is it complete? That's a difficult question because it seems like an iterative, an ongoing journey in terms of how you negotiate and where it goes next. I can, in that documentary, you saw the work that we are doing among the Santali people. These are the indigenous people of Eastern India and Bengal, and they have been building these community cultural spaces. If you will, spaces that are similar to the idea of a marae, where they can practice cultural practices drawing upon indigenous knowledge. But again, it's at one level the work feels complete because, say, in a particular community we have built a structure and a space, but then there is something else that comes up. So part of the process, I think, WhatsApp has been that it seems like an ongoing journey, and it seems like a relational journey. So some of these communities that we have been in, it's been a 20-year relationship, so and I really find, when I came to Aotearoa, this beautiful concept of Whakapanangataga, and when Marie's Land was here, she developed a white paper on Whakapanangataga and connections and how they can help us imagine ways of connecting academics to community. And what that brought into being is a relational model. So if we think of relationships, communities in relationships with academics, then I suppose it seems like an ongoing iterative journey that might not have completion points per se, But I love what Professor Graham Hingangaroa Smith, he was with us this morning. He was saying is that it's good to think about maybe transformative moments. So you might have many such transformative moments that might give a sense of having accomplished something. And he was saying how important it is to tell those stories of those transformative moments, even though one might think that the relationship isn't complete. Does that make sense?
I think then at least I would consider it completed, even when a single unheard person starts talking with the sense that they are being listened. So that's a great achievement. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mohan, I just want to say, actually, it's an amazing work. You have an amazing work, and I can see it. The range of the projects from all over the world, and especially, the voices of all these marginalized people actually that are missing. That is really, really great. Actually, you brought it in the academia and policy circle. And I can see it actually because I'm an urban planning, from an urban planning discipline, I can see it, especially Glenn Hines' project about the housing, about the fielding project, about the hybrid project, where there is the intersection with the urban planning discipline as well. And although in planning, we have a very traditionally very top-down kind of a thing that we take for the central government and the local government policies, and very much tokenistic approach of incorporating the community voices in the planning process. I think, but there is a desire in the discipline actually as well to bring the marginalized voices and through meaningful way actually in all these planning processes as well. So I mean certainly, but then discipline really don't know how to do it, and that I think the care next 5 years would help other disciplines as well how to bring these voices together within this, and I think that would be really, really wonderful because you have given these voices actually developing architecture of these voices with academia. I think that's really great. So just expanding that work to the wider other disciplines as well within the university. And I think there's a lot of a genuine desire to do it, but they really don't know how to do it. So probably sharing with your experience, and this is my first time as well to see your work as well. And so I'm really, really happy that I'm here today, can see the vast, you can say the range of your work, and definitely will share with my own colleagues as well. I would love to have another more conversation with you and hear how we can work together. So thank you very much again, actually, for your wonderful work.
Thank you so much, you brought up something that raises a really beautiful question. You think about the Singapore work, for instance. It's so, amidst the COVID pandemic, one of the things that we started seeing in Singapore is outbreaks happening in dormitories that were housing migrant workers. In fact, that's where, we talked about the Singapore model of pandemic management, which was great and celebrated, and then the pandemic started appearing in dormitories housing workers. And it really connects to urban planning because it connects to the question of the right to the city. What does a city look like when workers have the right to the city, right? So that they have a say in how housing infrastructures are designed, how the city architecture is designed. So certainly, I think there's a lot of opening for engaging with interdisciplinary conversations. but also something I would love for you, Selena or Christine, to talk about in terms of the fielding work, because the interface really seems to be with planning and with sort of council decision making, right? When the check dam was going to be built, and they said that they are doing engagement, and that whole engagement process felt like another layer of whiteness and colonial violence, so I would speak. Would you speak?
Kia ora. Can I firstly just say congratulations, Professor, on the 10-year anniversary to you and your father, to Belina and your Tamariki and your mum and dad. And although you have alluded to the fact that it's not just been 10 years, right? You've been developing the meta theory of the CA for much longer, and more importantly, building relationships with communities. And some of the members of our area in the building are some of them. But can I just quickly say to the gentleman in the front there that I think as long as there continue to be inequities and health outcomes and injustices in the world, the projects will never ever really be complete. In order to provide some direction, if you like, for what could CCA be doing in the next 5 years, I believe that's really a question for communities. There's so much work still to be done, as long as there are those unequal power imbalances. And just also to continue on the corridor that Mr. John here said. I now work in government. I used to be in the care. And this government, whether that be local government or central government, are really keen, so they say, to listen to the voices of communities. And I always say, really? Because do you know what that entails? It's not just to come together and engage in a colonial kind of way that they're used to, but it's that engagement is about, with community, authentic engagement is about pushing back on the structures. And is that what you really want to listen to? Because if you don't, then don't even bother. Don't dress it up as communication, and really it's just, it could be co-option. Yes, but I'll just check on that, on the field. So yes, the stopback that's proposed in the field. So just when we think that the local government representatives, and I don't mean PNCC, just when we think that they're finally doing it, that they really are listening to whānau, Hapa and iwi, then they go ahead and do something stupid and try and hold us to ransom over, do you want a public home, and then you need to stop that. This is just recently in the past couple of years. So there still is work to do in that sector. I don't know how many times we have to say it. I don't know how many different ways we have to say it, but it still has to be repeated and said so that they eventually understand that you can't just go in and prioritize Indigenous communities or any communities for that matter.
Now, Christine, and a beautiful part of that, Peren, is that the community already has solutions for how to prevent flooding. That's the context within which the stop bank is being built, right? And the community has solutions, but those are not listened to. So I guess the question is, how do you build spaces for authentic listening? And part of that, I suppose, when you're talking about interdisciplinary conversations, it's about how do we learn to unlearn a lot of the disciplinary baggage that we have inherited from the colonial structure. Maybe we have time for one last suggestion or a thought. Your point about interdisciplinary conversations is very welcome. I think there's just a lot of opportunity there. Vanessa, did you want anything to add? maybe I will give you the mic as a way to conclude us, because you have been so fundamental to sustaining the work of the Highway.
Thanks, Professor Mohan. I think just highlights the importance of voice, listening to those at the margins, listening to the community, creating the safe spaces where whānau or where the community do feel the trust to open up and be their authentic self. It's just important to keep creating those spaces and building relationships.
And Vanessa, part of that also, I think, is about how do we safeguard those relationships, right? So there have often been openings, for instance, for someone to come in and say, hey, we want to engage your community advisory group. And when do we decide where to invite someone in, or how to invite someone in, and what would be the protocol around that, right? That's been an ongoing challenge in terms of the authenticity of the space.
I think for I can speak only for my own community of Highbury. Over the years, there's been a lack of trust in so many different ways. So it does take time to build up those trusting relationships, I think. And it's a working journey, it's a journey, I suppose.
Nami, thank you all so much. As Vanessa says, it's a journey, and we are so humbled and privileged to be in this journey with you as a part of our community as we go through this process over the years. Can I invite you, Selena, to wrap us up with
I just want to say, I want to congratulate you too, Mohan, on a 10-year anniversary, and it's been a wonderful journey. I haven't been in as long as you have. I feel I'm just a new girl on the black block here. But and I want to answer your question, like in terms of completion. I guess for Māori, that's never going to be complete. This is just me coming from a personal point of view, because I feel like we moved like 3 steps forward, and yet that system, we go backwards. So in that way of thinking, I guess we as Māori, especially for myself, I've been conditioned to think a colonial way. And that's how I am. I've only just come back to education now after 45 years because I did not trust the education system. So I'm back in it now, and I'm back with a roar, for not only for myself, but for my iwi and the future generations. So I just wanted to say that. So kia ora tātou. Mihi atu kia koutou, mō tēnei tō. I'll just have a short cut here. I tō mata motu i te rani kia whakatapu tō kia kani purana tira tana kia ka me te karoria a kia ki āmia.
Once again, thank you all so much for coming. It was lovely to have you here, and we look forward to ongoing dialogues with you. Have a good evening.